Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ventures Podcast. This episode with James Bailey, the COO of Subquery, is amazing. We get into a lot of practical detail for investors and entrepreneurs, but especially entrepreneurs that are developers that are interested in building decentralized applications. We talk a lot about the difference between indexer nodes and RPC nodes and the types of details that you, as an entrepreneur, will practically need to know, including what the landscape looks like in terms of different providers out there, if you're going to build in Web3. And we even just talked specifically about how Subquery works, the background, the different types of services that they provide, how to use them, and more. So if you're listening to this episode, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com. There I'll have more extensive show notes, the different things that we talk about today. And if you're watching, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures and it should show up. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with James Bailey. All right, James, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Will. It's great to be here.
It's always a delight to be able to talk to somebody all the way around the world. For those of you in New Zealand, I like to say you're in the future. So hello, future.
And yeah, it's raining today, unfortunately. The weather's not that great in the future.
Okay. Yeah, so the last good handful of episodes have been all about Web3, why it matters, entrepreneurial stories in Web3. So I'm curious for you, how did you just start? Like, how did you get into the space? Like, what's your start into the rabbit hole journey look like?
Yeah, so I'm a chief operating officer at a company called Subquery, but I began my journey as a developer. Right, I studied software development at university, and for a young software developer, there are two leading edges of software development. It's AI and it's blockchain. Those are the two really interesting intellectual frontiers of our industry. And so it was a bit of a natural shift to kind of be attracted by this, because AI is too crazy. You need a PhD to understand that stuff, and heck, no one understands how it works. But blockchain's a bit different. So it was a natural attraction, and I kind of got involved with a blockchain company before my current one back in the day. And you kind of learn, this is back in 2018, when the ICO boom was in full swing, and they raised a huge amount of capital, and we didn't really see much out of the next couple of years in the winter. But I was very close to a colleague who was working on this company, and he said, "You got to come help me." And I originally started to help him kind of from more of a business development point of view, but have kind of jumped on full time since then. And wow, it's been a wild ride. You haven't looked back, but yeah, it's a roundabout way where I've always kind of wanted to get into it, but I just waited for the right kind of offer, the right chance. And looking back, I probably should have just been more active in my search to jump into this kind of thing back then.
Right. Yeah, I mean, AI and blockchain, right? They're like huge different worlds. It's like where in that world do you like to play? And yeah, I've always been intrigued by how people start their journey into it, whether, because it's so multidisciplinary that it's hard to really pinpoint where that is. So, okay. So then in the Web3 world, as you're meeting your business partner and jumping into that, can you explain a little bit more about what is Subquery? Why does it matter? Where does it exist in the ecosystem? Maybe frame that kind of world of blockchain and kind of where do you sit in it?
Yeah, so Subquery, in short, is a data indexer. Now, for those that don't know what a data indexer, if we take a step back and look at the problem, so blockchain, it's very early days in the space. There's a lot of technologies that it's new technology, but it's still, there are some weird parts about it that make life a bit difficult for building on it. Now, one of the biggest problems of blockchain is the way that the data is stored on the blockchain. So a blockchain is a chain of blocks, it's in the name. But for people that aren't technical, it kind of looks like a book of pages, where every 10 seconds or every minute a new page is written that includes everything that has happened on the last period from the last block. And so what you see is a string of blocks or this book of pages, each with their own sets of data. And if you wanted to ask a very simple question, like, well, what are the last 10 transactions that you have made? That simple question is very hard to ask of a blockchain because each page has no relation to the last. It kind of knows where the last one is, but doesn't know the data that was on it. So asking that question is like asking a book, what pages did this character appear on? You kind of can't really ask that question. You can kind of thread through all the pages looking for that information. But when the blockchain has millions of blocks, that's going to take hours, if not days, to kind of search through. So when this is an example when you want to build really cool applications, whether DeFi applications or NFT applications, anything under the umbrella of DeFi applications or dApps on blockchain, you need better access to that data. And this is the key challenge that Subquery is designed to solve. It's a data index. And what that means in short is it's a service or a tool that continually scans the blockchain and looks for the data that you want. And when it finds the data that you want, it will process it and store it in a way that you require it to be. So if you're building a DeFi app, a wallet, for example, that might be as simple as storing every transaction and the account information with those transactions. So when you want to ask it, what were the last 10 transactions that you have made, Will, it's very simple to get that answer back. And we continually scan through the blockchain. And whenever new blocks are added, we scan through those and we save that data in a traditional data storage called a database. A database is like an Excel spreadsheet. You can search, you can sort it, you can filter it. You can do a lot more with that. But in essence, all it is really designed to do is to make it easier for developers, make the lives of developers easier by allowing them to collect and organize this data, which is there's a huge amount of data on blockchains. It's very unstructured. There's terabytes there of it on it, and organize that into a more performant data store that you can use when building your applications. That's what it does in a nutshell.
Love it. Okay, so to get technical a little bit, what kind of APIs are available for developers? Are these JSON APIs? Are these GraphQL? Like what does it look like? It's GraphQL.
And the key thing here is it's flexible. So we built a data indexer. We kind of have 4 different tenets. First one is fast. Every indexer speed is really important. The speed of the indexing to scan through every block is really important. You don't want to wait for 10 million blocks to take ages. So the speed is important. The second one is the flexibility. The key thing is here is there's no off-the-shelf APIs. When you build a Subquery project, you define the shape of your data. You say, I want my data to look like this. And you write a simple mapping file that will say, here's a pure stuff from the blockchain. How do I move that into my shape that I want? It's also unified. So we originally started on Polkadot, and now Polkadot, we can go into that later. It's a bit of a network of networks. But we are expanding our support to Avalanche, to Cosmos, to Algorand, and more coming soon. So we're trying to aim to be this unified indexer that will work across every blockchain because we believe, multi-chain applications are going to be the next big thing in the next cycle. And finally, we're building it in a decentralized way. We can kind of talk about that later. The idea is that you don't have to rely on a centralized service, which is a very awkward kind of secret about blockchain dApps. They all kind of rely on centralized services. So trying to reduce the number of centralized services in the stack.
Got it. Okay. So a number of questions. Obviously, not all blockchains are created equal. Sounds like you started out in the Polkadot ecosystem, different parachains, I think they're called, et cetera, et cetera. Are you on EVM chains like Ethereum? How is that? What is that?
We're not yet on EVM chains. Avalanche is an EVM chain. We also support some EVM chains in Polkadot and Cosmos. So we're kind of dipped our toes in there. But we've come from this perspective of let's kind of start with, if you classify these chains, there's kind of like 3 generations of chains. There's Bitcoin, which is generation 1. You've got Ethereum, which is generation 2. And then you have a lot of the layer 2 scaling, but also like newer ones like Polkadot, Cosmos, Avalanche, Algorand, near, you can kind of call them as layer 3. So they're a bit more performant. They have some governance baked in. They're designed to scale a bit more. And we've kind of focused on layer 3 chains. So we've started Polkadot and moved to Cosmos, Avalanche, Algorand. We've started there. And the idea of that, or thinking behind that is, there's a famous quote by some hockey player. I'm not sure. I'm not a hockey player fan. But you skate to where the puck will be. And that's kind of the thinking behind that.
Right.
That's not to say we won't go back to EVM chains. Now, there's a lot of developers on EVM right now, but there's also existing indexing solutions there. So another concern here is that there's nothing out there for these newer chains. We're generally the first indexing provider on them, and and people when they get there are so happy because their life has become a lot easier. But going back to like EVM chains, it's kind of a bit, there's already players there and stuff. There's already heaps of providers.
Right. Okay. So then, in terms of understanding the landscape, for those that are just maybe even cursory familiar with it, including I probably put myself in that category, the Infuras of the world, and let's say the Graph. Where does Subquery play if we were to sort of if you were to describe kind of how how the indexing landscape looks like?
Yeah. So when we talk to customers, there's generally 3 types of competition. The first one is they've built their own indexing because things are so bad that they've just gone off and hacked together their own thing,
Right.
which is a huge waste of time. But they've done it, because they need it quickly and they need it today. So they built their own rough indexer. Second one is they use centralized indexes. So some indexes provide standardized APIs. There are providers out there that if you want, you can go get transaction feeds and price feeds and all like the standard stuff, okay, the off the shelf things. And a lot of teams will use those, but they don't give any flexibility. You get the data that you're given and you can't really change that. And when you're building your own unique application that is better than your competitors, you need your own unique data, your own bespoke data to make your applications have a point of difference. So there's those centralized kind of standardized providers. The third category, which we plan, is the custom flexible indexes. And that's us and the Graph. We're the main 2 players in that space. The Graph focus on the pure EVM chains. We focus on the newer landscapes. That's kind of the landscape of competition in the space right now.
Cool.
Yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
That's extremely, extremely helpful. Yes. Okay. So now, as a blockchain developer, let's say lots of Web3 developers that listen to this show, entrepreneurs that are thinking about building the next thing. Why is it important? Because one of the critiques of the whole space in general is that in order to build these decentralized applications, you then have to find a centralized indexing service to get your data from, and then it almost can defeat the purpose a little bit, although I have obviously mixed feelings about that. But for your own commentary, advice to the entrepreneurs as they are thinking about, as they're building their decentralized applications, what are the important things to know when choosing an indexer, when choosing, like, do you use multiple ones for failover? How is this different than, let's say, building in a Web 2 paradigm on AWS or whatever? What sort of advice would you have for these entrepreneur developers out there?
So this awkward secret, which is that these decentralized applications that we use rely on centralized service providers, and there's a few pieces of that tech stack under the hood. There's the indexer sometimes. There's also generally the node provider. So a lot of requests go through Infura or Alchemy, and when they go down, you kind of know nothing really works as it should.
Right.
And there's other kind of tooling and services that they rely on. So like price feeds, for example, might come from a centralized service. This is inescapable right now. I think I mentioned this at the start, right? We are so early in the space.
Yeah.
There are a lot of core technologies that are still being matured. And so relying on a centralized service provider is a necessary evil to build fast in the current climate. So advice to new people in the space, don't avoid it at all costs, because your life will be a lot harder and your product won't come to market as fast.
Mm.
And for a startup, for a new idea, time to market is quite important, especially in a market as fast moving as blockchain. So it is a necessary evil, but I think we as an industry are doing a lot that we can to move away from that. So for us at Subquery, we rely on nodes. We kind of we collect data from nodes. That could be any node, but we do collect data from nodes. We process that in the way that is defined in a Subquery project. But our main aim, and at the moment we have a hosted service where people can give us their project and we'll run it in our centralized infrastructure, and we run it really high reliability. We try to make sure it never goes down because, as I said, it looks bad if it does.
Mm-hmm.
But our main aim is to decentralize that. We realize that people want options to not rely on one party or one location. And for us, what that means in Subquery, that decentralization is about saying, okay, you want the Subquery project, well, that includes this data in this shape, and it's made for your application. It's your, like, let's say you built an NFT application. Will's NFTs requires this data set, and you built your Subquery project for that. And you can go out to the world of the Subquery network, and you can say to anyone, please index this data. I promise I will, Mike's got traffic. If you index this data, I will buy that data. And you can have multiple indexes around the world that don't know each other, but we've built in, proof of indexing, all these other kind of valid verification methods that you can be confident that if there are multiple people around the world indexing your project, you can be pretty confident that the data that they're giving you is legitimate. They've indexed that for you. So in a way, you've taken that problem from one service provider to maybe N, but it means that you have half the risk. So there could be two indexes around different sides of the world that are unrelated. And the Subquery network is designed to enable that and to facilitate that by allocating value to those indexes depending on the work they do.
Got it.
So that's what we're trying to build with the network. Now, we just finished our testnet. We had over 2,000 indexes in our test network indexing different projects. So it was a huge testnet, and it scaled wonderfully. We simulated days with 100 million API requests for data across these indexes, and we kind of hit the load capacity of a load generator rather than on the network. Like, we couldn't simulate more requests. So I'd like to have pushed that more, but we just couldn't get more out of our load generator. But we're currently working on our network. We're taking a bit of a roundabout way to get there. We're starting for CanaryNet. And the main reason why CanaryNet it's like a real world network, but it's slightly different. And the slight difference is that we've seen a lot of these service provider networks have struggled with the challenge of migrating users from a centralized service to a decentralized one. There's a lot of weird peculiarities, especially on payment, that people aren't quite ready for yet. And the whole point of this Canary network, we're calling it Kepler, is to allow us to migrate as much real-world traffic from our centralized service to our decentralized network. And the way that we're going to do that is that all requests will come through our centralized service, but we're going to proxy them off to our network. So there's still a centralized piece there, and that you can do the payments really easy. Everyone can pay a credit card to run their project. But behind the scenes is this decentralized network that's kind of running it. And you can simulate and verify and test out all the indexer side of things where anyone will become an indexer. So that's what we're working on next. And the whole aim is to move, we already have hundreds, if not thousands of projects in our centralized service, move a lot of those to the decentralized network kind of seamlessly behind the scenes.
Got it. Very cool. So is this just a read-only service, or are you also able to do writes through different nodes? So developers that use this as a read, what does actually what does the write process look like for developers that are working in these as you call them, L3s?
So the write is still like when you're writing a smart contract, right, the write will still be through the node via the smart contracts. The kind of the standard technology stack that we kind of enable is that you are still writing via the blockchain, which is really important. There's no middleman in there that could front on you or could change things. So you're still writing through nodes. We just immediately collect the result of that and update our data set from that. Okay, so it kind of keeps it secure, more secure in a way. That is a main. People don't really care much if you kind of the read stuff isn't as critical because you can kind of read the current state of the blockchain, but the write is critical. You don't really want to get in between, a dApp and a network in terms of the write. People have enough concerns about front running already.
Right.
So we don't allow writes to our network. We continually just index data off the blockchain. And one of the main reasons why we can't allow writes is if we're building a decentralized network, we've got to make sure it's deterministic. So the data that you have and the data that I have, even though we've never met and we've never talked to each other, it's got to be the same.
Yeah.
And if you're allowing people to write to the indexer, somehow we have to make sure that we both get the information at the same time.
Right.
Otherwise,
That'd
that
be kind of a
deterministic
one-way
breaks.
state machine, right? So that you're not just
Exactly.
And okay, so then just for developers that aren't totally sure about how they even write, how do they have that direct relationship into a a blockchain?
This is a pure like validator node or a node on a network, right? So there's plenty of like Infura likes or alchemies that allow you to write onto the blockchain. So we suggest kind of going with them, and then we'll read that straight away back off that blockchain.
But what are those notable services, say in Avalanche or in the Cosmos Hub or in different Cosmos chains? What is that? Who are those providers?
Yeah, so most of these neural chains actually, like the foundation, will run a lot of the RPC infrastructure, the nodes themselves.
Yeah.
There are a couple of kind of professional entities. One of them is called like GetBlock, QuickNode. Infura is moving into some. I think Infura just moved into Avalanche. There's a smaller provider called OnFinality on Polkadot. So there are a few providers out there that you probably haven't heard of. But they're targeting these neural layer ones.
That's great. Okay. And I've noticed even in previous episodes, we've talked about RPCs and nodes, et cetera, but I forgot to actually ask the previous guests what those are. Would you mind just giving us a quick 101 on what that is so that I can get the audience caught up on that who aren't familiar?
Yeah, so a blockchain has different types of nodes, especially for proof of stake networks. You will have a validator node, and a validator node is equivalent to a miner. A miner and a validator, their job is to kind of collect information and agree to save it on the blockchain with every other validator. So validators and miners will save data, but when you access a blockchain, you're not really talking to those. They're busy. They're busy doing other stuff. Okay, what you're talking to is generally more kind of library nodes, and we call them kind of like archive nodes or full nodes. And archive nodes will have the entire history of the blockchain in their storage, and so they'll just do nothing but answer questions. So you will ask this archive node through a JSON language called RPC, Remote Procedure Call. So it's kind of just like an API endpoint, and you can submit information and ask it questions through a provider. Provider will generally run these because they're quite heavy and expensive. But you can make requests through them for like, what's the current block height? What's the balances in my account? But also, can I save this transaction? And this RPC node will kind of communicate that around the network. So it's the main way that you interact with the blockchain network. dApps don't use validators. They don't run their own nodes. You can't run a node in a browser yet. You can't run a node on your mobile phone. They'll generally, because they're quite heavy, large bits of infrastructure, they'll generally talk to a professional node that's been run in a very careful way to make sure that it never goes down, so that anyone can ask it a question and will respond.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. So now, for those that maybe haven't put the two, how is an RPC node now? And it sounds like you can query it for some basic things. How is that different than the indexers that Subquery is able to allow?
An RPC node, you can say like, give me the state of this page number or this block height, or tell me what the current balance is, or You can give it a very like there's a quite defined
Hmm.
set of requests that you can make to it that's
Hmm.
documented. Okay, that's in the language of the RPC node. You can't ask it random questions like, what is the TVL for the smart contract? What were the last 10 transactions I've made? You can't ask it, what is the purchase history of this NFT? You can't ask it, give me the exchange rate of this kind of contract, this DEX contract at this point in time.
Hmm.
Okay, you can't ask that kind of questions because it's a very inflexible language. So an indexer provides that more colorful data. An archive node or an RPC, we request that data off it. Every time a new block's added, we get the information, the raw data from the block from the archive nodes, but we process that and provide more color to it.
Yeah.
So we kind
Cool.
of work together because again,
Great.
we don't hold the blockchain. We ask the archive node or the RPC node for that information.
Great, great. Okay, so for the entrepreneurs and the investors listening in that are curious about architecting their own token models, et cetera, how does subquery make money? Right, right. The very basic question:
Yeah,
how
very
are you
important.
making your investors money? What do the different token models look like? Can you talk a little bit on that level?
So we have three kind of products. The first one is the kind of the open source SDK, and as I said, it's open source. So you can go off and you can build a subquery yourself in the background and never talk to us again,
Hmm.
and run it in your own like AWS. Everything's happy. It's open source. It's free. The second part is a managed service. Now, at the moment, before we had the network, we have hundreds of customers rely on our managed service, where we run their projects in a reliable way, and we have billing relationships with them. Now, it's free for most people, but if you're a production application that's doing millions of requests per day, we have a billing relationship with you. We charge you to run your project. So that's one way that we make money. It's a very similar open source kind of model that you see around outside of Web3 and Web2.
Hmm.
A lot of companies will provide open source software, but also provide a managed service where they run it
Yep,
for a charge.
the kind of the red
Now we are
Red
building
Hat
a
model or
network.
whatever. Yeah.
And we are building a network. So this is then we go to the token model. And the
Hmm.
whole kind of token model is, you build a subgroup project, which is a recipe to index data for your application. You put it to the network and anyone can index that. Um, when you make requests, essentially you have to pay for that traffic. So you exchange subquery tokens for the requests of the data that you want. You can come up with like private arrangements to these indexes. You can pay per request. It's up to you.
Hmm.
But essentially, the subquery token is used as a medium of exchange to pay or reward indexes for providing the data that you need. Now, there's indexes, there's you, so it's like buyers and sellers. But we have a third party, which is delegators, and it's a whole staking arrangement where anyone with spare subquery tokens can delegate their spare tokens to their favorite indexer and receive a cut of the rewards that those indexes receive. So in a way, we've got this economy here where you have buyers and sellers of data, you have delegators who kind of throw a bit more jet fuel on the fire and earn some rewards in the process. And that's the token model for this, in short, in a way that doesn't require us to go through 20 pages of the white paper.
I love that. Okay, so now the $1 trillion questions, and feel free to deflect this because that might just be for the lawyers. But again, this show is all about educating and sharing the stories about the practicality about how to build ventures in Web3. On your third part, with regard to a token that you can stake and you have the indexers and you can share in the rewards of that, et cetera, et cetera. How do you get this token out in the wild? Right? How do you do a token generating event? How do you avoid securities laws? How and then your investors, like what is your advice for entrepreneurs that are trying to navigate that? Um, Obviously, they need to have their own lawyers and talk to the lawyers about this. But even just one level above that, I'm curious for information purposes only, like how you would guide entrepreneurs through this process.
Get legal advice is the first one, I think, as you've mentioned. It also depends where the entity that you create is based on. So I think it's very difficult to launch a token business in US jurisdictions because of the SEC laws
Hmm.
there. Most businesses that that kind of launch tokens will have an entity registered in a few places where they have clearly defined the laws around tokens.
Mm-hmm.
So places like the British Virgin Islands, like Switzerland, like Singapore, these places a bit more, they formalize this so that you have a bit more legal certainty around what you can do and how it will be taxed. So, for example, I live in New Zealand. Even though there are no laws saying you can't do it, there are no laws saying this is how it will be treated from a tax regime standpoint. And so, launching a token here, we don't know if that token will be taxed at the generation, even though we kind of give them away for free to people, or it will be some other kind of asset. So find a jurisdiction that you kind of have some certainty around. That's a kind of a big piece. And then you kind of, it's more like following these models of what other people have done. Now, the key thing is that it's a utility token. Your white paper must have true utility. It can't be just a token for people to buy and sell stuff, right? In ours, there is a reward structure. There is a way you can earn it, and it's very clear the utility of it is used to exchange data from the network. Okay, it's used as a medium of exchange for data on the network, and that's very key to keep afoul of any kind of SEC laws.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of maybe in summary, there's a lot of subtlety on it. There's ways that you position the business that you have to do to be very careful to stay to avoid kind of conflicting with these laws. It is a bit tricky right now, but it's definitely doable. And there's many companies that have done it before. Another option you have is just go full out and become a DAO. Just have no legal representation or kind of jurisdiction on you. Operate as a DAO. Create or keep some pseudonymity. But then there are also some issues around operating as a business, right? You can't accept or send payments and any other thing than crypto, and investors kind of are a bit like, hang on, if you're not happy to put your name on this,
Right.
I don't know if I want to give you my money. So that's got some other challenges, but a lot of people have done that option. They just go purely as a DAO route.
Interesting. Yeah, is where they are not docs. People don't know who they are, so it's hard to track them down. Yeah, no, that's a really helpful advice for the entrepreneurs listening in, and even frankly the investors as they're evaluating different projects out there.
I don't know. Yeah, I would never. We have a lot of customers that are not docs. They are still pseudonymous.
Right.
And I wonder how challenging it is. I know a lot of them would have given their identity up to investors, but it's a tricky slope. And there's a lot of scams that happen in this industry. Unfortunately, it's a situation where financial gains are so quite intertwined with the asset or the tokens that you put up. So it attracts a lot of the best people, but also a lot of the worst people. There's a lot of really smart people in the space, but there's a lot of real, less so. People that are out there to make a quick buck. And the one thing I think that you can do to avoid any scams, and when you're looking at a project, you kind of have to ask them three questions. Firstly, who are their investors? Because these are the big people that have put their money into these people, so they've kind of have some modium of trust on this group. Second one is, who are their customers, and are they actually customers, or are they just partners? Are they just announced partnerships, or are they actually using it? They actually interact with each other. How much social credit do these people have? And then third, question, where have they been from before this? Are they just completely new off the face of the earth? They became this identity that is now building this project. And if so, why weren't they telling you about what they built before that failed, right? You'll know this better than I do, that most startups fail. And, when you can kind of say up, and I did this company before, I did this company before, and both failed, they kind of sucked, but I learned a lot from them.
Right.
That's a lot better
right.
than kind of building this new identity just for this new one because you're kind of afraid of that failure haunting you. It's not a bad
Yeah.
thing as long as you weren't bad about it, as long as you weren't malicious. Having some background of failure is never a terrible thing.
So for you personally, what excites you about a Web3? Like what is your hope for what Web3 can do to impact the world for positive good?
Like I think this has been quite a this topic's had a lot of airtime. From my point of view, I don't think it will change the world. I think it'll be a very slow and gradual change. But I think the best thing about Web3 is it will chip away at every inefficient system
Mm,
that can be codified. Now, the best example of this is DeFi right now,
mm,
which is
mm.
incredibly um, broken. I had to get a new credit card, and we just put in some new laws in this country where basically I had to sit on a phone for 3 hours walking through every transaction I've made in the last 6 months
Whoa.
because I wanted to make sure I wasn't getting a credit card to pay off a loan or something. And it was completely like, why? Why am I doing this? You have my entire history to when I was a kid in this bank. Um, so there's like things like that which I can't wait for Web3 to kind of resolve. These big, slow-moving corporations that are unwilling to adopt new processes and practices
Mm,
that would make my life as a consumer a lot easier. And I think Web3 is not capable of doing that. And you see this with NFTs in a little way. The art scene, the way that we reward creators is broken. When the creator gets a few cents on the dollar for their creations, and the rest kind of goes to middlemen and dealers and record labels and all this other stuff. That's a little bit broken. Now NFTs didn't quite solve that, unfortunately. We kind of like took a shot and kind of missed slightly and focused on just making a lot of cartoons. But the technology is still there, and we've kind of dived into that. So yeah, as I said, I think it's about the slow but inevitable erosion of these inefficient and broken systems that we kind of take for granted. We just have to accept. But why does it have to be that way? Why can't we reward creators every time we sell something? Why can't we? Why can't when I buy a ticket to a concert or a show, why can't I sell that in a kind of an easy way just before the show because I can't go tonight? I'm too
mm.
busy. Why do I have to use a sculpting site that takes a massive cut? And it's all kind of broken anyway. Like, there's a lot of these
Right.
things that you just like, why can it be better than this?
Right.
And that's what I really hope that Web3 will kind of slowly but inevitably allow us to solve.
It's good. It's good. All right. So where can people find more about Subquery? Where can people find you online to continue the conversation?
Yeah, I'm always hanging around online. I'm on Twitter, James A Bailey, or just one word,
Cool.
is my handle. If you want it for Subquery, jump on our website, subquery.network, subquery.network, and you'll find everything there. If you want to start building, if you're building a new application in one of these ecosystems, go and check it out. The documentation, we've put a lot of effort into it, and it's one of the most it's one of those kind of things that you have to keep doing in life is
Right.
documentation, but no one kind
Right.
of no one thanks you for it.
Right.
Um, but yeah, we've got a lot of stuff there, so take a look. We are launching our CanaryNet, but what that means is that we're moving towards a token sale. There's actually a private sale on now for community members if you want to join. It's not
Mm,
too late.
mm.
But everything's on right now, so check us out there.
It's wonderful. Wonderful. James, really appreciate your time. This has been great.
Thank you very much for having me, Will.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, There, you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it would be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.